All right, let's look at the fifth point, which is writing objectives and competencies from the syllabus. As you can see here, we have a lot of aspects that will need the learners to be able to do. And you need to familiarize yourself with all these aspects in the syllabus. All right, these are the things that you're going to teach your learners, and you need to know them. And so that means you will need to instruct your learners on this, and they should be able to perform these competencies, and they need to achieve these objectives. When you're talking about competencies here, now according to definition from Merriam-Webster Dictionary, competencies is the ability to do something successfully and efficiently. So the learners need to know how to do these aspects. For example, use graphic organizers, write and present information ideas in various forms. All these things they need to learn how to do, because these aspects are necessary in real life writing. And when we talk about objectives and competencies, I've already mentioned to you that in this specific syllabus, the objectives are quite vague, which means that they are hard to really say that you can measure to see that if the learners have achieved them or not. They are very, very, very vague. But then competencies are more specific, because let's say here we have develop, organize, and produce ideas into coherent sentences, paragraphs, and whole text. Like, it's super vague, and we have so many action verbs that the learners need to do there. It's very, very vague. But then when you look at the competency, it's more specific. Use graphic organizer. For you to measure that, you have graphic organizers, and then these are now the tools that you can use to help learners brainstorm ideas and organize their information. Write and present information and ideas in various forms, and then these forms are complete sentences, simple, complex, compound sentences. Like, you can focus on these things. Paragraphs, introductory, developmental, and concluding paragraphs, or for various audience and purpose. And we have spoken about this when we are talking about the different principles that you need to consider when you are creating or teaching writing. And then write and organize ideas, sentences, and paragraphs in logical sequences. That's more measurable. Do you understand? And then here, write. So write in style appropriate for audience and register, like informal letter, formal letter. All these things you need to know before you go to the classroom. And we have many more, like punctuation, we have it there. Okay, if we go back, we have got diaries and journals. This is more on expressive writing, and many of these are more transactional writing. You need to know these things. That's why we are covering them anyways. Punctuation, these are the things that you need to know. For you to think about some of those objectives that we have stipulated there, you will do an activity for this unit. And this unit's activity is more simple. All you need to do is research and then write the references. Okay, well, let's look at the task. If I jump there. Alright, for the task of this unit, what you're expected to do is work with a partner, only 2 people maximum. And then you search for these topics. These topics are from the syllabus. You need to know how to teach this, because you are going to be expected to teach this in your own classroom. That's why I want you to find resources that will help you to work on these topics. That's why we are doing this activity. This information is not just for this specific unit, but is the information that you can use when you go and teach. For example, you go on the internet and then you look for educational website, not just any kind of website, but educational one. I will give you more information about educational websites. Or you can use textbooks to provide you information on how to teach these aspects or what these aspects are. For example, information should be on how to use graphic organizer. More information about graphic organizers, how to write sentences, simple, compound, complex sentences, how to write paragraphs, how to organize ideas. All these things you need to search for, all right? And then find those website or resources that you can use to teach this aspect. And when we're talking about educational websites, these are now websites that ends with edu. But I'll say that if a website also ends in gov, it's acceptable, because I've seen that some governments do provide information on language teaching, and those are the prominent websites that you have to use. That ends with edu, which means educational institution, and then gov, .gov, which is government, but avoid these other ones. When you find that the website ends with .org, it means that it's traditionally a non-government, non-profit organization. If it ends with .com, it's a commercial site, and mil is military, net is network. So avoid these ones, just use these ones. And especially the .com, anybody can write information there. It's not based on research. That's why I want you to focus more on .edu website, because if it's an educational institute, many times that the information that you find there is based on research, and we want our teaching to be based on research. Next, for each topic, reference the website or the textbook or text or article, whatever, that explain how to teach or carry out each of those topics. Before you copy and paste, read the website. You need to read and ensure that whatever that is written there makes sense and you can follow it, and it can help you when you go into the classroom. In other words, make sure that the information is usable when you go and teach. I want you to already start preparing for that. You have information how to write different kind of genres or different types of texts. As all the other activities, change the document into PDF and then submit it under the link that you find in Unit 7. I'll have to create those soon. So that's the task. And then how does that structure looks like? The due date is going to be the 21st of September. You still have enough time. And then the names of the students, next the topics, and then you reference APA. All right, you have to go back to the website, to the link on how to reference APA, and then you reference where you got that information from using APA. And then we've got the different aspects there. All right, next we are going to look at the different approaches that you can use when you are teaching, the different phases that you can follow when you are teaching writing. The pre-write, while, or during, and then post-writing. And this information is from Wiggle. That information is based on Wiggle that we're going to cover in this section. If we look at this, it stipulates all the different phases, right? And then for these phases, we can look at them, we can divide them into the three major phases. The pre-writing phase, and then we can divide it into the while or during writing phase, and then we have got the post-writing phase. That's how we're going to look at it if we are to group them in the three major categories. Now let's look at these different phases in more details. First, we are going to look at the pre-writing phase. So here, this is basically where you give them the structured activities. You give the structured activities to your learners to provide them with motivation. Like, why do they really need to learn how to write a blog, for instance, or write a journal, or write a formal letter? You work on that here in the pre-writing phase. And then you focus on the content, the fluency, and the language practice that they will need when they are going to write. Examples that we have here are the structured language practice. So as an example that I've already given you, if it's more on comparative language or cause and effect, then you give them a language practice of those structure that you want them to employ in their actual writing. And then you give them the readings, and the readings should be like models of, let's say, a blog. If you want them to write a blog eventually, then you give them the reading that they're going to do should be an example of a blog, for instance, to expose them to the different features of a blog. Or it could be a film, which will give them ideas that they may include in their writing. It could be discussions, all right, on the ideas that they will need to use when they're writing. It could be brainstorming, webbing. Webbing here is a type of graphic organizer that they can use to put in their different ideas when they are writing. Or it could be outlining. So this is the first aspect that you need to cover in your in the pre-writing. Next, we are now going to look at the while or during writing process. But this is now the kind of assessment that needs to be done in this phase, is one that will help the learners improve their writing. And as you can see, this is writing, but then the pre, as we have seen from in the previous, in the first phase, the pre doesn't have to be writing. Do you get me? And it's the same with when we're doing the pre, while, and post reading. The pre and the post doesn't need to be focused on the writing, the reading objectives. Objectives is the same here. The pre-writing does not need to be just attaining or aiming to attain objectives that are stipulated in the section of writing. No, it doesn't have to be that way. Do you get me? Anyways, let's now move and focus on the while writing. So the while writing here, now they need to concentrate on writing their first draft. Here, focus on content and getting ideas on the paper and not so much on accuracy. Reacting of a reader or listener, here you have them either peer review or review themselves or have a conference with a teacher. Like somebody needs to react on what they have written first and then provide written feedback. Those are the activities that you can do here when you are reacting. So somebody has to read and then give feedback. Reseeing, rethinking the content and writing the second draft. So after they have done the feedback here, then they come back here, then they reorganize, rethink their content, reorganize, adding details, removing certain information that is not useful, and then adding supportive arguments or supportive information for their for their draft. And here we have got now the editing part. So refining attention to writing conventions, including grammar, vocabulary, ensuring that it's accurate. And now that can be done in the third draft. Here we've got checklists that will guide them, grammar logs that you guide them of the type of grammar or structures that they need to include in their text. Give them exercises that will help them focus on their draft, and proofread practice happens in this while writing phase. As I've mentioned, evaluation is not so much on the actual product, but the evaluation should be done in order to help the learners improve their writing. The last part that we're going to look is the post-writing. And here in the post-writing is focused on what do the learners or the student, as referred here as students, what do they do with their finished piece? Are they going to display the information? I think we have to get into the habit of, using the texts that the learners have produced. So for example, if it's a blog that they have, it's a structure of a blog, then have them write an actual blog that is going to be on the website. Now you as a teacher, you have to decide, is it going to be seen by the public or is it just for the class? So you need to lock it, to protect it, to fit the context in which the learners need to produce their letters. So example here, display it, share it, put it in the newspaper, for example. This is going to really encourage the learners when they are writing that, oh yeah, my work is going to be produced, like the best ones is the one that is going to be put in a booklet or it's going to be given to a newspaper, for instance. We have to get into the habit of that. Or is the final product only going to be evaluated by the teacher and then the learners will be given a score? Or are you going to have conferences also? Or are you going to use the rubric when you are assessing them? Or are they going to assess themselves by providing them a checklist? Or is it going to be part of the portfolio that the learners are working on? Do you understand? So that is now what happens in the post-writing part. Or post-writing, you could also have learners share their information with the class. Or you can have them talk about their writing a little bit. Do you understand? Or have them talk about their writing process altogether. That's now the post-writing. The possibilities are endless. It just depends on you and what objectives that you want to cover or to have being achieved. That is going to guide you on what you're going to include in your pre-writing, the while writing, and as well as the post-writing. The next topic that we're going to look at now is providing feedback to your learners' writing. And here we're going to look at 3 types of feedback that you can give your learners. We're going to use the information by Wiggle. The 3 types of feedback that you are going to look at is written comment, individual, conferencing, recorded, oral feedback. So those are the 3 types of feedback that we're going to look at. Now let's look at the written comments. The advantage of written comment is that endnotes and margin comments can reinforce strengths, like it stipulates what is the strength of this specific paper that the learners have produced. And then it can also indicate exactly, because it's in the margin of the section that you want the learner to improve. This is the advantage of the written comment. The disadvantage of the written comment is that it takes up so much time. It's really time consuming. And the other disadvantage is that written comments are open to misinterpretation. Maybe the learner will not really understand what you are referring to or what you mean exactly. So there's that room of misinterpretation of what the comments mean. The next type of feedback is individual conference. One of the advantage of the individual conference is that it provides opportunity for to clarify, negotiate meeting through discussion. So if there's a part that you don't understand about the learner's writing, the learners get a chance to really clarify what they mean. Or if there's a comment that has been given in the written feedback, then the learner has a chance to ask for clarification. The other advantage is that they may be less time consuming than providing clear written feedback. It's less time consuming compared to the one that we have just seen, the written feedback. The disadvantage is that the teacher and or the learner may not be available outside the classroom because you need to do it individually. Let's say if you have a class of 40 students, it's going to be impossible for you to do this all in a class. So you have to arrange time for you to give the feedback outside the classroom. Learners may not be willing to attend office hours. I mean, you know how learners are. Not all of them are comfortable talking to the teacher or using that office hour time. And the other disadvantage is that learners may not be willing to admit when they do not understand the teacher's comment. It's like they don't want to annoy the teacher or they don't want to seem stupid. So they will not tell the teacher that, oh ma'am, I do not understand this comment. What do you mean by this? What do you want me to do? And then the last type of feedback that we're going to look at is recorded oral feedback. The advantage of the recorded oral feedback is that it may be faster than the provided written feedback. And the other advantage is that it provides opportunity for listening comprehension as well. The learners are just not going to be shown or given an opportunity to practice to improve their writing, but they get to practice listening comprehension. And learners can listen to the comments multiple times. So if they don't understand something, it's not the same as when you have individual conference. So if you say a comment and the learner probably was not paying attention, they lose out on that comment. But then with the recorded one, they can always go back and listen to the comment as many times as they want. And last but not least, non-verbal information, inflection, tone of voice can promote a positive interpretation of comments. It's like compare now to the written feedback, which does not portray inflection. It does not portray non-verbal communication much. Here, when we have got emphasis on inflection and voice tone, all this really promotes better interpretation of the comments that are given to the learners. What are the disadvantages? One of them, technology may not be available. In our context, in the Namibian context, unfortunately, that's why online learning is not working very well. It's because technology is not available. So you might not have knowledge to do this. And I hope that seeing the impact of COVID, that we are going to reevaluate how we use technology in our classroom and make it more affordable and accessible to as many learners as possible. The other disadvantage is that some teachers or learners may be uncomfortable with the recording equipment. Some teachers don't just like they do not like to hear their own voices, and they don't want to be recorded because, people sometimes misuse recordings, if you understand what I mean. They misuse, which is actually a punishable offense, that you use your teacher's information for for your own, like to ridicule the teacher, for example, if they've made mistakes. Like, it's just not acceptable. So they might not be comfortable in those terms, or they just do not like recording. They just don't like technology usage. Next, now we're going to look at the different scoring rubrics and self-evaluation that you may use in your classroom. Here we have got an example. Ways to give feedback on writing and scoring. So that's what we're going to look at. Here we have got an example of a scoring rubric. And from this rubric, you can see some of the important aspects that the aspects that are going to be evaluated in the learner's writing. Here we've got content, organization, and clarity, and it specifies exactly what under content, organization, and clarity. Rather than just saying 50 points, they stipulated exactly how does the learner get the 50 points. Paragraphs, including specific content, and how many do you give them there. To understand, it's more clear, it's well defined, it's more detailed than just saying a vague term there. And then grammar, mechanics, and format, you can see then sentence structure. From the sentence structure, what are they going to look at specifically? Complete sentences, subject, verb, problems, no verb, no subject. Do you understand? Like, it's more helpful. Even when the learner reads this, they will see what they need to work on specifically. And these are the terms, these are the aspects that the teacher is going to evaluate them on. You could use this, but then if these are not the things that you are looking for, which means that when you're creating your checklist, it should include the aspects that you deem important for the learners to know how to practice. All right. And then I think your checklist should also be informed by the syllabus. Do you understand? You just don't decide that, oh, this is what you're going to include. It should be based on the syllabus to ensure that the objectives, the competencies that are stipulated, the learners are able to achieve. And then here we have got an example of self-evaluation if you've never seen a self-evaluation. So this is an example of a self-evaluation. And here we have got content. My assignment, my ideas are relevant to the assignment. My ideas are easy to understand. And here they have to check now, yes, is it really true that my ideas are relevant to the assignment? You say yes or no. My ideas are easy to understand and clear. You say yes or no. Do you understand? And then you have to encourage your learners to really be honest when they do this. And you tell them that the self-evaluation checklist is not so much to punish them, but for them to improve. These are some of the things that you need to accompany the self-evaluation explanation, that this is just meant for them to really improve, not to punish them if they fail on these things, which means they will know what they need to work on. So here, organization, I follow the direction of the writing assignment. My assignment is in the correct length. If you have given them a restriction, is it really within the restriction given? Mechanics, jumping now. I use appropriate words. I use sentence combined to avoid simple sentences or run on fragment and fragment. Do you understand? So these are things that they need to really have before they start writing. And then after they finish writing, they can use it to really check that, oh yeah, I have all these things, these aspects that are going to be graded on. And then here we have got a pre-review checklist. And the pre-review checklist is presentation, the font double, title, margin. So if these are the aspects that you want them to include, is it really complying to those procedures or to those aspects that you want them, or characteristics rather, that you want them to have? So you can see that this is a very specific pre-peer review checklist, because here maybe they had analysis, examples, evaluation. Is that type of writing? This is very important. Then it needs to be included in the checklist. So whatever checklist that you're going to use, be it peer or self-evaluation, it needs to include aspects that are necessary. Don't just include aspects that are, how do I say this? Let's say you have your learners write a report, But then in that peer review checklist, you just copy it from the internet and then you use it. But then the one that you have copied from the internet is meant for evaluating a letter. Then obviously it's not gonna work because it's not meant for a report, but it's rather meant for a letter. So you have to make sure that whatever checklist that you use, it's really looking at the different features and characteristics that you want the learners to include in the type of writing that they are covering. Here is another, this is a rubric. So there are different ways that you can really work with when the learners are being assessed after they've written. So sentence and paragraphs, and we have got 4 points here, grammar and spelling. Do you understand? Like those are the things that you need to think about when you are creating the checklist or rubric guides to assess the written texts. Next, we're going to look at the 9th topic, which is grammar in second language writing. And this information is from the article by Ferguson. When it comes to grammar and grammar in writing, it needs to be there with the purpose of helping the learners write communicative pieces, to write effectively so that their writing is effective when it comes to communication. Learners need to see grammar as an essential component of language that they can explore and use for their own communicative needs rather than just a tedious, complicated set of rules that they need to memorize and regurgitate, or as a template to be used solely for identifying and correcting their errors. They should know that the grammar is really there to serve them, to help them be more communicative, to communicate effectively. Teachers of ESL writing must attend to the special language needs of their learners. And in our case, we can't really say that, oh yeah, I'm just going to focus on this aspect, but we have a syllabus that we need to cover. So whatever that you're going to teach in your classroom, it should be reflected back into the syllabus. If the aspect of grammar is not in the syllabus and you think that is impeding communication, then you can cover that in your own classroom. Both deductive and inductive instruction is necessary in the writing class. The learner's needs and the context in which they are may influence what grammatical structures that the learners may concentrate on. I've already stated this point, that our coverage or whatever objectives and competencies that we're going to train our learners on should be based on what the syllabus has stipulated. But if there is a certain grammatical error, for instance, that the learners tend to do and it impedes communication, then you need to cover that in your lesson. Okay, since Namibia has a syllabus that defines what kind of writing the learners will be covering in the classroom, the writing teachers might consider the following questions to guide them on how they plan, select, and create the activities that are going to be included in the class, some of which need to focus on form. So these are the 5 questions. The question 1 is, what grammatical structure do writers use to make meaning, create connection, and express stance in their writing tasks? So that is the first question. So for instance, the genre is narrative or descriptive or argumentative. What kind of language structure, grammatical structures do they really need to know that will help them communicate that function well and create connection? Like, for example, cohesive devices. What cohesive devices are needed in a cause and effect essay or any other kinds of text type? And then expressing stance here. When you're talking about stance, is the way in which the writer and the speaker express their personal feelings, attitude, evaluate, judgment, or assessment. Do you understand? So here, when we are looking at this, is what type of stance are we talking about? The stance that we can think about is, how do you express certainty or doubt? How do you express limitation, precision, actuality? What do you need to train your learners on? All right. in terms of expression, what do they need to use in their expressions? And then if we are looking at, let's say certainty, what adjectives do you need to use to express certainty or unlikelihoodness? What adverbs do you need to include? For example, typically, possibly, do you understand? And what kind of verbs can you use there? Things like seems, appears. What models can you use? That now we are looking at examples that you can use when you are expressing certainty or uncertainty. Models, you can have may or might. These are all the words or the language structure or the stances, expression of stance that you need to have your learners practice to include or to use in their written texts. Second question is, how do linguistic features of the writing task and associated reading differ from the students' everyday language and other kinds of writing? Here now is to talk about, here we are referring to exposing the learners to the different types of writing that they use in everyday conversation, for example, or everyday writing compared to the academic writing. For instance, the type of writing that they do when they are texting compared to the academic essay, for instance. Do you understand? You have to expose them to all those kind of writing. So how is the language, the spoken language, different from the written language? So these are the things that you have to think about when you are creating your lesson. And this is very much related to what is stipulated in the syllabus. They need to know informal writing and formal writing, spoken language in relation to written language. How do those differ? What characteristics, differentiate them from each other? The third question is, what kinds of grammatical practices can help develop the writer's overall fluency? We know that we have already spoken that grammar plays an important role in helping learners to be better communicators when they write. Now, for this very same reason, you have to think about what language features, what language activities, what grammatical activities, for instance, are you going to have the learners practice? Because you know that when they practice that and they get to know how to use that grammatical structure that you have them practice, they will need to use it. Like, you have to remind them that they need to use that grammatical aspect in their own writing. It also includes things like that will help them with fluency, is using different kinds of words instead of overusing certain terms. Let's say we are focusing on cohesive connectors and the learners are familiar with only and because. What happens usually is they will be using those terms over and over, and that does not show a lot of fluency. For them to use different kinds of connectors, you need to teach them the different kind of connectors and teach them how they can use them in their sentences, and hopefully they will use them correctly in their writing. Fourth question we have is, what kinds of grammatical focus can help writers develop their ability to paraphrase, summarize sources? Okay, summarizing and paraphrasing is one of the difficulties, the pain points that Namibian students have. And not just Namibians, but other students. Some students do have abroad, I have noticed that. But we need to train them. We need to train our learners on how to paraphrase and how to summarize, because in their writing, they are going to, in some types of writing, they'll be needed to synthesize information that they'll collect from different articles or different sources. So we need to teach them, how do you summarize? Don't just say, okay, go and summarize this text, but you need to have activities in the classroom that will help them how to summarize. For example, if they need to change a sentence, then you work on changing verbs into nouns, for example, so that the sentence will be different. For instance, let's say the sentence is, the project director told them to review the plans. And you can say, now change this by changing, swapping told with said. What would you do? How would you change that sentence? An example will be, the project director said that they should review the plans. All right, there we have got the word said used in the sentence, and also told them is changed to they. And do you understand? So you have to show them how is this done, and then paraphrase. And then when it comes to rewriting sentences, what are some of the words that they can learn to do? For example, they need to change reporting verbs to other types of verbs in their sentences, changing verbs into nouns or the other way around, how to change the syntax. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say, how to change the syntax to paraphrase. You need to have them practice for them to really know how to paraphrase and how to summarize. Last question is, how can the teachers help writers develop grammatical knowledge for linguistic accuracy and strategy for effective editing? We have already seen in the syllabus that there is the process writing aspect that we need to train our learners on, starting from brainstorming the ideas and writing first draft and second draft and editing. All these things are stipulated in the syllabus. Then how do you get to train your learners to do these activities? Do you understand? How do they learn to edit effectively? How do they work on, let's say, correcting their own grammatical errors? What platform or tools are there to help them? So you have to think about now, what are some of those tools are you going to use for them to help them with grammatical errors? So for example, if they are using the word processing, then obviously they can use that to help them with correcting their grammar. And there are other tools. Let's say Grammarly is also one of the tools that you can use to check the grammar, the language structure, the accuracy of the sentence structuring. And then you have to train them on how to become effective editors. They need to write the first draft, they read it themselves, or they write the first draft and then they have somebody read it on their behalf to help them with correcting their linguistic structures. Or it could be having them reading their written text out loud so that they detect the errors that they may have. If they are quite fluent in the language, they will pick up the errors that you might not catch when you are writing, but when you are reading, you can catch those errors. So those are the questions that you may need to consider when you are creating your lessons. And remember, for us Namibians, we need to really focus on the syllabus, making sure that whatever that we cover is helping us attain the objectives that are written in the syllabus. When it comes to grammar, you know that there are grammatical terminologies that we may use when we are explaining certain aspects of grammar. You do know. But then there are certain grammatical aspects that our learners need to know, and you can use those terminologies, those grammatical terminologies, such as here we have got things like adjectives, nouns, adverb, preposition. These are terms that the learners need to know. And we have got simple sentence, complex sentence, compound sentence. For instance, those are the ones, the common ones, the basics ones that the learners need to know. But then there are certain terminologies that are too technical that the learners do not really need to know them, but they just need to know the function. For instance, we really need to make sure that they are well explained and simplified and relatable to the learners and to their knowledge level. And instead of, let's say, saying infinitives, you could refer them to two verbs, like to eat, to run, instead of saying infinitives. Or instead of saying progressive verbs, you say the ing verbs. Those are the terms that are more relatable to the learners. They can remember that. Gerunds, these are the ing nouns. Relative clauses, the learners will not remember these terminologies. But if you say ing verbs, ing nouns, which, who, that, adjective clauses, then those are, which, who, that, clauses. These are the ones that the learners can really relate to and can remember. Okay, what we need to do is simplify the terms. And how do we simplify the terms? We connect the words to their grammatical function. When we do this, the learners they will not need to memorize these terms, but rather they will just remember this and their function, they apply that into their own writing. Certain terms are just too complicated, a lot for the learners to really memorize. So you have to find a way to simplify. As I've mentioned already, I'm repeating myself. The next aspect on grammar, the role of grammar in writing, is the text analysis activity. We have got text, so a reading text, for instance, or writing text, and then we need to analyze that in terms of activities. We do activities that will help the learners analyze the text that they will do in the classroom. Let's say learners can benefit from this type of activities by, really learning the grammatical features or grammatical systems that are used in authentic written texts. All right, so this type of activity is really good to expose the learners to the different features. As I've mentioned already, we need to provide models to the learners, and then we have to give them activities that will expose them or make them aware of the features that are in the different types of the types of texts. So if it's a letter, it always has an address, it has a date, it has such a salutation, it has closing, it has the paragraphs. So when we do this type of activities, they really get to see, I see, this is how the letter looks like. Oh, I see, this is how the blog looks like. These type of activities are very crucial in teaching our learners the different types of grammatical feature, for example, or just writing features of the different texts that exist in authentic. We mean like texts that are meant for communication, for the real world, and not meant for language learning. From the text, the learners can learn how various genres of written English differ structurally from, let's say, oral to written text. Like, how do they differ? They get to see that when we give them this type of activities. And then the teachers need to make sure that whatever text examples are brought to the class have a level of grammatical feature difficulty that is not beyond what the learners already know. It's not beyond their developmental stage. It's not higher than what they already know. It should be a little bit challenging, but not way too challenging that is discouraging. The teachers also need to examine assigned text to see what kind of grammatical features or grammatical structure, contrast, or system are dominant and which contain forms that the learners will be able to use in their own writing. So, as I've mentioned earlier, as a teacher, you need to prepare. You need to spend some time to prepare, to find the right type of text, to find the right type of text that have features that you want your learners to learn. And you need to highlight, we'll see some examples that you need to highlight some of these features so that the learners can see them. Providing learners with different kinds of text for analysis will help or give the learners a good opportunity to identify the grammatical features such as adjective word order, article usage, sentence types, in some cases compare the structure to their own usage of the kind of writing that they are focusing on. Do you understand? So I think this point I've already mentioned. It's a good opportunity for them to really see, this is how people write in English so that they communicate very well. Or this is how you write to make sure that your language, your text is varied, like you use simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences. Do you understand? So you expose them to all this kind of writing, and you encourage them that they should use the same kind of writing, but as long as you teach them how to do that. Now here we're going to look at some of the guidelines that you need to think about when you are selecting the grammar points to use in your classroom. As we have already mentioned, whatever grammatical points that you're going to look at, it should not be way higher than their developmental levels. I think that's why the type of grammar aspects that are included in the syllabus are not way above their developmental level. They are not way too difficult for them. And for us teachers in Namibia, we need to refer back to the syllabus to guide us on what we should include. The grammatical features should reflect the learner's writing needs for the course or for the future writing. As stipulated in the syllabus, those are the types of features that we need to use in our classroom. Unfortunately, we don't have so much freedom of what we should include. You can use different kind of text, but make sure that they are the type of text that are stipulated in the syllabus. When possible, assigned course reading should be a source of text analysis so that grammar focus is integrated with other pre-writing activities. So that is to say, to simplify that, whatever readings that you bring to the classroom, it should somehow, in some way, relate to the type of writing text that you want your learners to produce. So you bring in a reading text. Let's say you want them to know how to write a blog. For them to practice their reading skills, which are stipulated in the syllabus, you can bring in a blog as an example. Do you understand? And then you give them a comprehension activity. They will practice their reading task. Then they will discuss about this text. And the discussion could be, and if it's writing, it could be on what are the features of a blog. Then they will discuss, oh, the blog has a title, it has this, it has that, it has this type of language. They have that discussion. And now after that, you give them a topic on whatever, let's say how to save money. They discuss how to save money, the ideas. And then you ask them, okay, now write your own blog on how to save money. You can use the ideas that you have discussed or the ideas that you have that you're going to research on and use them and synthesize those ideas into writing your blog. So here you are killing two birds with one stone. They get to practice their reading skills. They get to discuss. They get to, using this reading text that you have brought, they get to practice their reading skills. And after, and then analyze the text to get the features of a blog. And then they use this information in their own writing. So that this is what this idea means. Everything should work together. It should sync when you are teaching. The lesson should generally be kept brief. When you are looking at the features of a blog, the whole class should not just be about looking at the features, but you teaching them on these features, but it should be made very brief and understandable, and for them to practice and have them practice as much. And then it's through practice that they will definitely get to learn this, where they are going right and where they are going wrong. It's by doing that the learners get to really learn how to do something, how to write, for instance. The teacher may want to enhance the text by underlining certain elements or making them bold-faced, especially those that are not very salient for some learners. So I already mentioned that sometimes you have to highlight the features that you want your learners to concentrate on, because they are learners. They might not know these things. They don't know what they should focus on. So when you underline the aspects, let's say the titles, the different paragraphs, when you highlight that, they will pay attention to whatever that you highlight. Here are now some of the examples that you can use in your own classroom when you are focusing on text analysis. And I would suggest that you go and read up on these terms more on your own. Like when I give out this PowerPoint, I'll put the page numbers of these examples. So one of the examples that you can use in your own lesson is tense and time frame shift. Like you give them a text whereby they will look at how the time frame has been shifted within one text, because the rule is always like keep to one tense when you are writing, but then there are times when they have to shift because of the point that they're trying to make. So you give them an example and then you see how the time frame is shifted, so that when they go right, they can also shift their time frames instead of just sticking to one tense and time frames. And then unpacking meaning in the sentences in context. For example, when you give them text, in reality, we have got writers who always compact so many ideas in one sentence. You can have these activities in the classroom. You bring a text that they read, and then let's say it's a formal letter, but then in one of the paragraphs, it's very dense. It needs to be analyzed, it needs to be cut, it needs to be unpacked. The sentence needs to be unpacked for you to really understand. So that's one of the activities that you can do. To learn more, please go to the pages of this type, of this aspect, so that you read more about them. And then identify cohesive devices. You bring them a text, and then you can either highlight the cohesive devices already before you give them the text, or you can ask them to, let's say you have already taught them about cohesive devices, then you give them a reading text. It's an informal letter, and then this informal letter you ask them to underline the cohesive devices. So it's identifying the cohesive devices, and then so that it emphasizes or it cements the idea on cohesive device and how they can use them in their own writing. The next one is comparing language differences across genre or text type. So here this is now an activity whereby if you have, for example, an informal letter and formal letter, you can have them compare the two types and see what are the differences in them when you're writing them. Or it could be a blog, like a personal blog on experiences compared to an application letter, for instance, or to an essay, a descriptive essay. You compare the language features that you want them to really know, and the features that you are looking at should be, related very much to what is stipulated in the syllabus. Expressive stances, we have already spoken about that. The stances is like expressing your idea on a certain opinion, for example, and then hedges. Hedging is like not saying something straightforward, all right? So that is the stance. How do you hedge? How do you provide information without being very sound very certain when you are not very sure? So what kind of language can you use to hedge? So that is just one of the activities that you can do in your classroom. And it's not limited to that. We have so many activities. What you have to do as a teacher is expose yourself to different kind of teacher education textbook to learn the different kinds of activities that you can use in your classroom. Don't use boring activities. Reuse activities over and over and over and over. I mean, it has overusing or using certain activities over and over has a place, but not all the times. Right? We have many activities. I wish we could cover them all, but time is not on our side. Now we are moving on to another aspect when it comes to grammar in language teaching, and that aspect is treating errors. How do we treat errors in our classroom? So teachers need to tell their learners about the importance of being accurate grammatically when they are writing their, let's say, either professional context or academic context, or even relational, like friendship context. I mean, you need to be grammatical, because sometimes when we are not grammatical, there is the possibility of you impeding your readers to understand what you're saying. So there is a place for accuracy. We have got fluency, also accuracy. Accuracy in terms of grammatical structure being accurate. Here are some ways on how we can focus on and treat errors that may happen in a writing class. So the first one that we're going to look at is editing strategies and techniques activities. We have already mentioned earlier that in the process writing, there's also this aspect of editing. We need to train our learners on how to edit. Do you understand? This is a good skill for them to have, because it's necessary for their own, it's very necessary for them when they're in school and also out of school, especially if they are thinking of going to varsity. This is a good strategy for them to have, or a technique that they have to have. So here we are going to look at activities that you can do to enhance these editing strategies and techniques. And the other aspect that we are going to look at when it comes to treating the errors are types of feedback or feedback that we give the learners regarding their errors. Now let's move on. Editing strategies and techniques. So here are now some of the activities that we're going to look at that will help the learners really focus on their linguistic accuracy, for them to be accurate grammatically. Diagnostic essay administered at the beginning of the class help teachers identify both individual writers' errors, patterns, and errors common to a group of learners, which can then be the focus of explicit instruction during the course. So here what we mean basically is that it's always good to have diagnostic essays to see where your learners are struggling. Alright, so diagnostic is, I hope I think it should be in your assessment and evaluation class, whereby we use diagnostic essay to see what the learner's weaknesses and strengths are when it comes to writing. And then from that approach of using diagnostic essays, you really get to see what are their struggles, and then you focus on those struggles when you are teaching, provided that whatever errors or situation that is happening there is stipulated in the syllabus, or when you notice that it's really impeding their communication, it's an error made by so many of the students, then you have to tackle that when you are now going to teach them in the course or the subject that you are teaching them. Following review of grammatical structure, the learners can edit short text with specific kinds of errors. For example, now if you are focusing on subject-verb agreement, and you see that that is one of the issues that the learners have in your classes, then you can give them a text whereby there are many errors on like this subject-verb disagreement, like they are not connecting very well, and then they have to correct that. Or plural nouns lacking the S to show plurality. Then you have to write some nouns within the text that they are reading that they are not, the plural is not reflected on the nouns that need to be plural. Count nouns, non-count nouns, plural markings. Do you understand? So that's the type of activity that you give them. Or if they have got an issue with changing sentences, the tenses, for instance, then you give them a text that they need to read, but then there are some errors on the tenses that they are struggling with, or the tenses or grammar points that are stipulated in the syllabus. Do you get? So that's what you have to focus on. That's the type of activity that you give them. Next, the teacher can collect examples of the same error, such as verb tense error, taken from the learner's writing, and ask the learners to identify and correct them as a group activity. So when the learners have submitted their essay, you see that there are a number of learners who have got issues. Do you understand? Like some struggles. You can pick out those sentences. You're not going to say this is from who or anything like that, but you come and write it on the board, and then you say, what is the error? Like, what are the errors in these sentences? And how do we correct this error? So that is another activity that you can do in the classroom. For errors with great deal of variation, such as word choices, the teacher can provide explanation of the common sources for such errors, and learners can then assess whether these sources are the ones they may need to check in their own drafts. So, for instance, if we have got word choices, like the learners tend to make mistakes with this and these, then, there, theirs, etc. Like when you see that there are many mistakes related to the terms, to certain terms, then you can make them aware of this, and then you can ask them to go back to their drafts and then correct their own errors. So you teach them on an aspect or struggle that they're having, and then you ask them to go back and then correct their own errors. Do you get me? Like you are really involving them in the learning process, in the teaching process, in the evaluation process. Our learners as ESL writers need to devote considerable time and effort to becoming good editors. So that is now to say that we really have to train our learners to become good editors and be involved in the process of good editing, not to wait until the last minute to write their work, to work on their writing, which does not give them enough time to brainstorm, to structure, to edit, to redraft. So if now our concentration is highly on process writing, and if it's the product writing approach that we are using, then you can teach them how do you detect some of the errors that you may have written but you don't see, but if you want to detect them, you need to read out loud. You have to teach them these things. Like they don't need to read out, if they're in the classroom, they don't need to read out loud in such a way that it will disturb their classmates so much, but they can, read it out loud, but in a soft voice, not in a way that will disturb other people. So those are the type of good editing skills and tips and strategies that you can teach your own learners. The next one, otherwise, Many will fail to benefit from the classroom exercises and practice even from individual conferences. So you teach them these strategies, and then you really have to ensure that you tell them, make them aware, explicitly mention that, oh, this is what good editors do, and you need to practice these skills because they are good for now in your academic life or when you go into the job market. If you don't say that, they will fail to benefit from these activities that you are giving them. You need to give the reason why they are doing certain activities and how they are doing them, the benefits of all the activities that they, class exercises or activities that they're doing in the classroom. You need to give them the rationale behind them. Otherwise, they will miss out on the opportunity to really practice and benefit from these tasks. Next, learners should be encouraged to explore different strategies to find ones that serve them best. We have got different processes, different steps that we can use in the product approach or the process approach, and now it's up to them to decide, oh, how do I work best? Because we're not just training them for the examination, but it's for real life. What strategies now do they have to adapt into their own bag of tricks that they can use when they are doing the actual writing in the real life? And that is the end of the editing strategies and techniques. Next, we are going to look at teacher feedback on errors. Below, we are going to look at some of the general guidelines that, grammar teachers can follow when they're giving feedback on the grammar errors that the learners make. At the beginning of the subject or at the beginning of a course or at the beginning of a lesson, what the teacher needs to do or may do is provide the learners with an error analysis sheet based on in-class writing that identifies the types and the error patterns. So in other words, don't just give the learners a text and then you tell them, oh, here, find this kind of error. But you need to really guide them. Like, how many errors do they need? For example, if it's verb tense or tense errors, how many are there in the text that they are analyzing? So which means you need to read that text first and find all these aspects that are grammatical aspects that you want, or grammatical patterns, errors that you want the learners to identify, and then you specify them, like, oh, there are this how many errors, and then you have to have now the learners identify that number of errors, or you just ask them, okay, identify 5 of them instead of 10 of them, and what features or what type of features, grammatical features that you want them to focus on that have been written but they are erroneous. Do you get me? So you have to prepare documents for them beforehand. The teacher should use indirect feedback to correct the errors, which generally more useful than direct correction of errors. What do we mean by that? Instead of let's say the student wrote, we was sitting under the tree, blah, 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 blah. Instead of changing it that we were sitting under the tree, you can just underline the verb that has an error, and then we write VT. VT stands for verb tense, that it's not correct. You use symbols to help them detect the errors that they have. So that is indirect feedback rather than correcting the feedback for them. Then when you do that, they get to think about the mistake, do research if it's necessary to find out how to write it correctly, and hopefully they will learn from that process. Here we have got other examples of the codes that you can use. VT stands for verb terms, WS stands for word form, ART stands for article. Do you understand? And as long as you have taught them these symbols, they need to know these symbols, and when you use them in their writing, they know what they need to work on. Also, you can highlight the mistake or the error, highlight or underline the error, and then they can work on that error. Or so that those are the things that you have to do. Or if you have more time, you can produce links to some of the language lessons, grammatical lessons that are pertaining the errors that the learners are doing in the classroom. So that's what you have to do there. The teacher should not provide feedback on all the errors in any one piece of writing. This can be very overwhelming for the learners. Instead, what you need to do as a teacher is focus on some of the errors that you have either covered in the classroom or that you think that when they are done, they impede or they affect communication, or the errors that are made by a lot of your learners. Then those are the aspects that you need to focus on, or the errors that you need to correct when or to give feedback on when you are marking your learners' essays. Because if you are to look at all the errors that the learners are making, you will not finish grading. Ask me about that. I've learned the hard way. You will never finish. You just focus on certain errors. While the bulk of teachers' feedback on errors should occur at the later stage of their writing process, the teacher can alert the learners to areas of concern in earlier drafts, also so that all the error feedback is not given in the last draft. So here the suggestion is, as they are writing their first, second draft, remind them of certain things that they should think about. Like when you're writing, okay, think about your articles. When you're writing, think about your structure. Think about these common mistakes that are made by a lot of students, so that you don't make the same mistakes. If it's possible to have individual or small group conferences with learners to focus more on errors, the teacher should take that opportunity. If you have a chance for that, to do it either outside the classroom or inside the classroom, do make use of those chances. It's a lot of work. Teaching is not an easy job. I'll tell you that. I will not even lie to you. It's a challenging job, but then it's a good challenge that will help you grow. Do you understand? Use as much time that is available to you to really help your learners as you can. But do take some time for yourself as well. Such opportunities, when you have conferences, for example, allow the teacher to focus on the errors in details. That's why we really need to make use of our time effectively. And then if you have got remedial classes, if you have that chance in your school, please make use of that to really help your learners become better. And during this time, now you can show your learners how grammatical errors impede reader understanding. Focus on errors that creates reader confusion and misinterpretation when they are vague, like how confusing can they be and how they can be misinterpreted. What they are writing can be misinterpreted. Focus on the sources that cause learners errors, such as, first language interference, for instance, or just them having not formula or rule about a certain grammatical point. And that's the end of the teacher feedback era. So this is now the end of the grammar, the role of grammar in writing. Next, we are going to look at assessing of writing, and specifically during the examination, the final examinations that the learners are going to cover. So the first thing that we are going to look at in the syllabus, we have got AO2, which means assessment objective. And assessment objective 2, and the 2 is basically the writing part. So the first assessment objective of writing is communicate information, ideas, opinion clearly, accurately, and effectively. And then all that to happen, they need to do the different activities that are stipulated, or they need to attain the competencies stipulated in the syllabus. The second one is organize ideas into coherent paragraphs using range of correctly linking words. So here we have got the cohesive devices. Do you understand? It's like everything is coming together. Whatever that you're teaching them that is stipulated in objectives and competencies, they are going to be assessed during the examination. Now, let's move on to the third one. Use variety of grammatical structures and vocabulary accurately and effectively. So here we are talking about grammatical structure, the different types of sentences, complex, simple, compound, and then using different kind of cohesive devices rather than just using the same one, using various vocabulary rather than just sticking to the same one that you overuse. Do you understand? It's going to be evaluated. And then show control of punctuation and spelling. And these are the things that we have spoken are part of your task that you need to do. How do you teach punctuation, for example? The learners are going to be assessed on that when they are writing. So it is good for you to really know how to teach that aspect of writing objectives and competency. How do you train your learners so that when they are going to be assessed, they are not going to be disadvantaged? The fifth one is use appropriate register, style, format for the given purpose. Here now you have to consider the purpose and then the audience, and all this is going to affect how the type of register that you're going to use. And they also need to know the different formats that they need to use for different written texts. All right, so those are the 5 assessment objectives. Those are the aspects that are going to be the objectives that are going to be assessed in their examination. Now let's look at the written tasks in the examination. Remember, writing is part of the reading and writing. The reading part is section A, and then the writing part is section B. And then here are the type of tasks that they are going to do. Some of this we have already done in class when we are looking at the syllabus. We have got the guided writing. It's the control writing. They are given prompts on what they need to include in their writing, like what kind of information do they need to include, what kind of format, and who is their audience. Like all this information is given to them. There's always a simple short stimuli that will help them, guide them on what they need to include in this type of writing. So this one is shorter. It's approximately 100 to 150 words that they need to write, and then it assesses all the 5 assessment objectives. And then when we look at the second task, which is now extended writing, it's also going to assess all the objectives that we have mentioned there. But then this one now, the candidate choose one of the 3 topics, either narrative, descriptive, or argumentative discourse. In other words, here they are free to choose one of the 3. They are given a choice. They choose what they want. They are not being guided. They are not being controlled as to what they should choose. But in any case, in narrative, it should be using language register that is for narrative. And if it's descriptive, use language structure that is descriptive. And if it's argumentative, then do you understand? So they still need to include those features for the different types of writing text, but they have a choice. They choose which one am I going to work on, instead of just everybody writing the same text. And then remember the guided task is 15 points, and then the extended task is 20 points, which makes up 35 points. And as we have covered in the class, the syllabus have given you a guide, a grid that you can use to assess the learners. We have got the different bands. So if it's content, relevance and development of ideas, we have got 5 bands. The first one is like the best, maximum point that they can get is 8. Second is like 6 to 7. Third is 4 to 5. 2 to 3 is the 4th band, and the last one is 0 to 1. And then it describes, and I want you to read this on your own. It describes on how you're going to mark them. It gives you an idea. And then the language, which is style and accuracy, it also has 5 bands and how they can get the points to make up 15 points. And this, again, as you can read, is quite general. It's not very specific, as we have seen the different scoring rubric that we have looked at, which is more specific. What you have to do when you are teaching your learners is use this guide to help you formulate your own guide that will help them, that is going to be tailored for the type of text that you're going to do. Because this one is more generic, because it's tackling, or it's covering all the 5 assessment objectives and the different types of text. It does not state exactly that it's meant for, let's say, formal letter, for instance. No, it does not say that. It's more generic. But then when you are in the classroom, you really need to make your rubrics more specific, or checklist more specific to the types of writing that you're doing. For example, if it's a blog, then you look at the different features of the blog. And if it's a letter, the different features of the letter should be included in your rubric that you're going to use to assess your learners. And then the next one is just the guide for the extended writing. It has got 6 bands this time around. The maximum points that you'll get either for content or and language is 10, and then it explains how they're going to. And then when you read this, it's really vague. It's still not very specific. So what you have to do, let's say if you have a lot of teachers teaching English at your school, you may need to come sit together to come to a consensus and find a baseline that you're going to use to assess your learners. You have to decide, so what are you going to consider as best writing from the group of learners that we have at our school? What can we consider as terrible? Like, you have to look at some samples and then you decide, come to a consensus of what you're going to consider as best or the lowest performing type of. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of our lesson on writing. It's quite a long one, but it's very detailed. Very helpful, I think, when it comes to teaching writing. Things that you need to consider when you're. And we have got our references. Thank you so much for your time. Until next time, goodbye.